Hello everyone, I have been fortunate enough to have been given early access to Civilization 7 from Firaxis, which I'll be using for this review. However, this video isn't sponsored, and as such the opinions given are my own, which you can probably tell by the complaints section later on in the video. But speaking of me, I personally also hold extensive experience, for lack of a better word, within the domain of Civilization games, growing up on Civilization 3 all those years ago, and even still partaking in the odd Civ 3 game these days, to playing a very unhealthy amount of Civilization 5, for example. So while I like to think that I may know a thing or two about Civ, and hence you should trust my opinion, I also want to be clear that I very much like Civilization as a series, and I also quite like the genre itself. So naturally, if you personally dislike the series or the genre, your opinions will differ. Disclaimers aside, Civilization 7, like the other 6 Civ games that came before it, is a 4X game. So your main 4 features are exploration, expansion, exploitation, and extermination. The main change for Civ 7 is twofold. Finally, we have invented navigatable rivers, which I'm surprised took this long, but they're implemented quite well and are a good addition. But the main actual twist, for lack of a better word, is that we only have 3 ages. But each of those ages is significantly more impactful and refined. Unlike previous iterations of Civilization, where the barracks you build in 2000 BC is more than capable of equipping your tanks into the modern era, progress through Civilization resets certain progression milestones, leading to what can best be described as a soft reset, which occurs now twice during the age transitions. With that said, let's see how Civ 7 deals with the 4Xs we expect it to deal with. The exploration mechanics are good, I enjoyed them, and honestly, unlike previous titles where the exploration phase ends around 15 to 10% into the game, with Civ 7 having a secondary exploration age where you actually go and explore a new continent, new world style, you get a second exploration phase, which I enjoyed conceptually, and I think is implemented quite well. It addresses a rift with reality, as it were, that most famous explorations that we know from pop culture occurred from the 15th century onwards, so everything from the Columbian voyages to New World to the explorers going to deepest Africa or the Arctic. All of those were certainly not prehistoric scouts with a dog. In Civ 3, for example, the Explorer unit was unlocked at the late medieval age, and it was a really good unit for exploring, but the issue was by the time you unlocked it, you already finished exploring the entire map like 50 turns ago. And given that map trading was in the game, you probably already traded maps with the AI by that point too. Exploration gets a tick, let's now talk expansion, and indeed with the second colonial age, you do get a second expansion phase from the New World colonization, so it's extended and improved. I'm happy to sign off on it too. The exploitation part, or the burning up your lands to extract resources, is expanded again with individual province modifiers, for lack of a better word, for specific trade goods like silk giving plus 10% culture. I think that's good, and I think it's a good system, but here I will actually have my first complaint. Strategic resources work weirdly. Because they're global now, the simple reality is that the more you have it, the merrier, but there really needs to be an upper limit, because if I'm a swordsman and my country has iron, neat, I get a small buff, that makes sense to my combat ability, but if my country has 3 tiles of iron, okay, maybe I'm getting a couple extra spare swords because my country's overflowing with iron, but if my country has 20 iron, I'm not fighting twice as strong as an enemy swordsman, simply because the streets of my country are paved with steel. Same with horsemen. Having access to horses helps a horseman operate, right? Having an abundance of horses means that I can select the strongest horse and gain a buff. Sure, I understand that. But if I have 25 horses per horseman, I'm not riding all 25 horses into battle at the same time, am I? But the stats make it look like I am. That brings us naturally to the combat, which I have to say that fundamentals and options are there. The commander with this unique promotion tree system is cool and is an improvement to the system, if not even more overpowered because of extra modifier stacking potential, but we'll touch upon this later. While it is still 1 unit per tile combat, it does very much in my opinion work, although it is a continuation of the Civ combat as it were, so if you liked war and fighting in Civ, you'll like Civ 7 war, but if you didn't, I don't think Civ 7 changes enough for you to get convinced. Overall, is the game worth getting and playing? In my opinion, yes. Current Civ 7, in the format that it is in front of me, has sufficient features, game mechanics, or for lack of a better word, content, to be worthy of a pickup and a game. That's not to say there isn't room for expansions. For one, the religion system could use a lot more content. I would prefer for it to not be practically age-locked to just the exploration age. And indeed, the game currently looks like it would have, say, 40% of the civs I'd expect it to have. I mean, Britain anyone, or even take a USA at this point to be honest, but we have Normandy. But that kind of transitions us to the less formal part of this review. Let's address some of the changes made, and I guess more importantly, look at what I've disliked in the game as well, to give a more rounded review. So here we are in a save. This is just a random 4 city, basically plain tour build. There's no real reason to go 4 city, though technically I'm 5, one of the AI cities defected to me because my whole build is happiness stacking. which I think makes it more likely to be defecting. Either way, I've said why not Free City, although I think they're going to flip away. I digress though, and let's just go through some of the other mechanics and things going on here. First of all, the big one is of course workers are gone, and that's builders for the Civ 6 enjoyers, or workers for anyone from Civ 1 all the way to Civ 5. With workers being removed initially, I was not a fan of the system, and I was not going to be, well, endorsing that as a message, but I'm not going to lie, having played with it, I have to admit that when I sit down to play a game of Civ, the last thing I'm thinking of is I can't wait to do worker micro. Like, I can't wait to go and micromanage my workers and improve specific farms and build mines and those kind of things. That's not really why anyone plays Civ, I don't think. And so getting rid of that and basically having that done on an automatic method removes pretty sad, busy work, for lack of a better word, and I think it's genuinely a good change. I was initially, when I, started playing Civ 7, quite skeptical of that shift to no workers, but I have to admit that as a movement, I do now endorse, because even now, going back to the older titles, I'm like, I can't actually bother to work these workers. If they can be done automatically, that'd be great. The other big part of this, of course, is that now that wonders take up a whole tile, and districts they're kind of gone, but instead you need every building is its own district. So buildings take up a whole tile, basically. Like, if you want to build a granary, you need to build an urban district, and granted, these urban districts can fit in multiple buildings inside of them. In the Antiquity Age, we're talking about 2 buildings here, so it's still quite good. Your cities are sprawling a lot more, but it does mean that you actually end up with a lot less natural tiles to work. And in this case, very much on my capital here, which is a very ridiculous 27 population, because this game is incredibly balanced and very easy to modify stacking. We'll touch upon that later. Well, the fundamental issue was that I ran out of tiles well before I ran out of other things to do. So yeah, that's that. As you can probably also tell, I have every wonder put down ever. I literally ran out of wonder tiles. So that is also a secondary mini nerf to places like Petra. Because yes, of course, Petra still gives you buffs to desert tiles, but the issue is that you're using up most of your tiles as well. And given that there's so many warehouse bonuses, so for example, if you have a farm or a camp, you can build a warehouse building that gives you a bonus to those buildings. Petra is relatively less impressive for +1 production, because you can get like +3 production from farms from specific builds. But that brings us to the other natural part. There's a lot of modify stacking in this game to an almost ridiculous extent. You can make a build out of almost anything. In this case, the entire build for this nation was all around just stacking loads of happiness, because this specifically converts happiness into extra food. Hence, my capital has 27 population and is about to grow next turn, which is frankly ridiculous. And I think a good example of this would be actually talking about negative modify stacking, more specifically comparing the overextension mechanic in EU4 to the settlement mechanic here at the Civ 7 level. So, if you're over your settlement limit, which you get from technologies and certain civics and stuff like that, you gain -5 happiness in all settlements per settlement over the limit, to a maximum of -35 happiness. -35 happiness is actually pretty bad. It's a pretty significant debuff. Now, it's not as bad as something like Civ 5 would be, where in Civ 5, 4 happiness is already a big amount, and something like +12 happiness from Notre Dame kind of sets you up for happiness for like half an age. It's not that hard to get happiness, but still, 5 happiness is a non-trivial amount of happiness, and if I had to convert to Civ 5 relative standards, it's around 1 to 5 is a good ratio to look at. But it's percentage modify stacking. So for example, this Civ has a unique thing which gives +10% happiness on a district. You are not going to struggle printing happiness. Like, this city currently has 44. So yeah, happiness is not difficult to get at all. And I'm having random war awareness penalties and random city defected to me happiness. And by the way, in case you haven't noticed, I'm currently in a unhappiness disaster. Just another heads up, if you hadn't noticed. So yeah, there's a lot of modify stacking and ways of mitigating a lot of these modifiers. And the reason I bring this up is that if you build around it, you can definitely offset -35 happiness. And this debuff is capped. So it means that at some point, if you want to just ignore the settlement limit, the game says, okay, you can ignore the settlement limit mechanic. It's going to cost you 35 happiness in every city, but we're not going to punish you for it. If you are 10 over or 50 over, it's still going to be -35 happiness. Let's contrast that to the EU4 system, where if you're overextended by, say, 10 or 20%, you get some debuffs, which are noticeable, and you can deal with them, but they're certainly noticeable already at that 10 to 20%. By the time you hit 100%, you start getting major debuffs. So at 100%, you cross the soft cap of overextension, and you start getting terrible overextension events. The flat modifiers are really, really bad, and they're really crippling, and you start resetting the soft cap. So in Revolts in EU4 have a mechanic called recent uprising, which basically means that once a person has risen up, they're not going to be able to rise up again. And then there's things like separatist sentiment, where a new province gets conquered, they get extra unrest. If you're super overextended, those mechanics start getting thrown out of the window in the sense of that the separatist sentiment starts happening again and so on. Meanwhile, in Civ 7, they're like, if you can deal with minus 35 happiness, you can go 50 over settlement cap, we don't really care. Which kind of brings us to the next point, difficulty. If you're used to the older difficult games from Civ, so for example, the deity in Civ 5 being genuinely quite a challenge, for lack of a better word, and I mean Civ 3 Sid being practically impossible to do because of the huge amount of AI buffs, and so on and so forth. Civ 7 difficulty is, I think, honestly easier than Civ 6, and Civ 6 deity wasn't too challenging, to be clear. One of the main, I guess, issues as well that I've very much encountered is even when the AI does gain access to a non-trivial amount of resources, although in this case they're also very behind, even when they have resources and they have science and they have influence and all these things, they don't tend to use it, which is weird. Like, they build troops and then don't use troops, and I think it's a weird offset. It might be already fixed at this point because there was already a bit of a patch to the AI that came out from the pre-release version to what's going live. Because bear in mind that, of course, the Firaxis developers are paying attention to this kind of feedback, and they are fixing stuff and noticing things as feedback is coming in from people that had early access to. So I'm not sure to what extent it is fixed, but that's one of the things I've definitely noticed, is the AI very much just doesn't use a lot of the buffs that's given to it, and it very much needs a lot of these buffs to function. Because in this game, where there's so much modifier stacking going on, the AI needs the baseline buffs to just keep up with the player. But I think we've kind of talked about the modifier stacking and the game balancing issues around in that regard. I do want to go back to a nice thing that I do want to basically commend as a positive, and that's going to have to be when we look in the tech tree. One of the things that I really, really liked, and I think is a very excellent addition to the Civilization franchise, are going to be technology and civic masteries. Basically, if you're just behind in the tech tree and you just want to catch up and get your mainline techs, like you want to figure out bronze working so you can build a new tier 2 spearman units and the archers, or you want to figure out currency so you can actually build the bathhouse and marketplace, you can do that. But if you're ahead in science, one of the things you can do is pick up these mastery techs. A lot of the time, unless you're me, in which case I've finished all the techs and I'm just getting them for fun now, they aren't that useful. So I guess this one gives you +1 production on production buildings and +3 combat strength for fortified districts. This is very helpful if you are fighting on fortified districts, and this is helpful if you have a bunch of production buildings up, but if you haven't built any production buildings and you don't have any fortified districts, the masonry mastery tech does literally nothing for you. So there's no point getting it. And it is entirely optional. It doesn't unlock anything, and it kind of gives a reward to people that are focusing on science or on culture without letting them pretty much run away with the game and get tanks early. It keeps it on a level playing field where everyone goes up into the ages at the same time without also, punishing people that are doing well by not giving them any buffs for doing well, if that makes any sense. Like, for example, speaking of modifier stacking, I should probably have picked up this one because it gives me +1 happiness on every happiness buildings, and I've got a lot of happiness buildings, so I should have probably, done that. And +3 combat strength for range and siege units is pretty good too. So you get the picture. These are quite strong buffs, but it's small little modifier stackings you can pick up if you're ahead of time on science. The other thing that I think is quite cool is that civilizations actually get, and leaders get unique civics that they have access to, which gives them unique buffs as well. And I think having civ-specific buffs be given out based on not just you start the game, okay, now you get +1 production of pastures or something like that, or Russia in Civ 5 getting +1 production on strategic resources. Like, you don't get it based, you have to actually research now. And this restricting it behind research, I think, is a very good system because it basically lets you semi-balance it. For example, Rome only has 2, I believe, things, or 3 to research, while Myron has 4 things to research, but their thing is stronger, and it's made up for the fact, but I think these techs are more expensive than the Roman ones as well, so, like, yes, there are the bonuses can be slightly offset by making it harder to research the prerequisites to get those bonuses, and I think that's just a really good addition to Civ. It's one of those things that now that someone's presented this idea to you, like, yeah, that's a cool idea, that's, I like this, but it's hard to just conceive of these ideas on their own. So yeah, this I very much endorse. The masteries on the civics and the unique civics for each civilization I think is really cool, and it's a very neat addition to the game in terms of adding more customizability. Although again, as before, it has even more modifier stacking and overpoweredness, breaking the game potential. So that I do endorse, but what I don't endorse, and this is one of the reasons I've actually started to say, because we're about to go to the next age, we have to enter in a couple terms here. There's not much that I'm building. I guess you can enjoy the random gameplay. And there we go, this is a growth city. I guess we'll shove another specialist in +4 science, sure. Well, we just next turn here away into the next stage so I can get to my next point. Have to address, I am playing, granted, on minimal crisis strength, but I have to say that crises are underwhelming in Civ 7 is an understatement. Just going to the arm because I'm currently in a crisis, if you haven't realized, and it's a happiness crisis. But the problem with that happiness crisis is that it doesn't really affect me, and I don't mean in the sense that the modifiers it gives me are irrelevant. I mean in the sense that it quite literally doesn't affect me. The 3 modifiers from the crisis is that my settlement cap is reduced by 1, but I'm below settlement cap, so that does nothing. I gain, I think, -6 unhappiness, so -6 happiness in every city I didn't found, but I founded all of these cities, so that again does nothing, right? Like, I founded all of these cities. This does nothing for me. Ooh, a celebration. Sure, let's take some culture. But basically, I'm currently in disaster. I gain -6 happiness in every city I didn't found. I gain -6 happiness for every city that's 9 tiles or more away from a capital, which, again, is none of them apart from the one I don't care about. That just revolved again away from me, so that's neat. So that does nothing. I founded every city. That does nothing. And I get minus my settlement cap. So I'm in a disaster, and all 3 of those modifiers do absolutely nothing for me. Which is, yeah, another moment of the game balance. Here's a little fun cinematic as we go into the next age. But with that said, the reason I brought all of this up is, yeah, you get legacy points for based on how well you do on your legacies. That's all neat. Anyway, the main point here is the civilizations. You don't play the same civilization, and this is one of the things I personally do dislike. I think one of the big parts of Civ is the selling point that you get a civilization, you get to see it throughout the ages. You're kind of forced to abandon it now. And it's very gamey, where you really just play civilizations based on their buffs. So I'll be picking something like Ming now because I want to have access to their unique unit or their Ming Great Wall improvement, or I'm going to go play Majapahit because they still have the unique quarter for extra happiness modifier stacking, or I'm going to go play Shawnee because they gain a really good food building and stuff like that, right? Well, I feel like there's a real lack of continuity, for lack of a better word, within these civs. And one of the mods that I'm most looking forward to being seen is basically an ability to just keep playing the same civ into the next ages. It would definitely require a lot more expansion and modding capabilities to be done, because you're going to have to basically make every civ have all 3 age versions of it. But yeah, that's one of the mods I'm looking forward to before I personally keep playing the game. Because for me, it's even more immersion breaking that I was just playing as, I believe, Brunei or Borneo, or basically one of the Majapahit area tags, and I guess I can now either become Majapahit, or I go play China, or I go play a Native American. You know, it's a bit random. I should not be able to go from Brunei to Native America, right? But it's something I can do. And indeed, as you can see on the age transition, the other thing I want to show you is going to be the decrease in game the reset of the snowball for a bit, because of course I'm making all of the resources and all the science, all the culture, and that's going to be knocked down a massive peg as we go into the next age here. With that said, the other thing that I also do want to touch about while we are loading into the next age is going to be the leader XP system and the level up system. Yeah, I don't like it. I think that if you have a leader, all of their abilities should just be unlocked at day 1. I don't want to go grind Civ 7 to unlock extra leader abilities and extra leader traits. And especially if I go watch a YouTuber or content creator go make a video where he's playing around with, I don't know, Prussia that gets +5 combat strength on their units. But he only gets that because he's level 10 Prussia, and that's a special Prussia perk thing that he's earned from leveling up, and I have to go play Prussia for 20 campaigns to level them up to even earn the ability, earn the right to play with these modifiers. I don't think that's good. I'm not a fan of that system, and I'm looking forward to most likely a mod that just unlocks all the perks right away, so I don't have to grind out a level up on these civilizations. That I do very much not endorse, and I have to say is a negative of the game. I think the level ups aren't good. And with that, the other thing that I'm also going to have to cautiously, shall we say, unendorse is one of the teased perks for the Founder Edition of Civ, is that they are now locking natural wonders and special wonders, so things like, or not special wonders, what are they called? Civilization wonders, so pyramids and things like that, behind certain DLCs, but not in the sense that you get an expansion pack which comes with 10 new civs and 10 new DLCs. No, I mean like almost individually, where if you get the expansion pack, you get access to like 3 extra wonders or natural wonders. I don't think that you should be locking away individual natural wonders and things like that, like the small little bits behind individual DLCs. It seems a bit nickel and diming. Just, it's like 2 natural wonders or something. I don't think that should be sold behind like a 199 mini microtransaction, for lack of a better word. That I do dislike, and that I cannot endorse, for lack of a better word. And so I'm just going to bring it up here because it's one of the things that I've very much observed and cannot endorse. With that said, it's certainly still playable, and I expect mods to come along and provide like 50 other unique buildings and wonders anyway, so if it's going to be content like that, you can certainly mod it in yourself. So I guess that's always the silver lining. But if you are playing on some of the other console editions they're making for Civ, I'm assuming modding is going to be a lot more painful, so yeah, you guys are going to struggle. Finally, my main complaint, and I kind of touched upon this earlier, which is the Civ roster and the leader roster currently available. I think it's very, very reduced so that they could have a bunch more leaders in specific DLC or future expansions, for lack of a better word. And the reason I bring this up is that, of course, I can understand why we have civs like Brunei and MiG and so on, sure, fair enough. But we're missing big boys, like, we're missing England, for crying out loud. We're missing USA, we're missing a lot of the other civs that people are very much used to playing and being in the game. And I think the only reason for that is because they're going to add it in DLC. I will be very pleasantly surprised, ironically, at this point, if they just don't have an England civilization. I mean, Civ 6 managed to avoid having Portugal in the game, so, that's kind of a big one. So if we just don't have an England, I find that quite funny. But at the same time, I do feel like they're just not adding England day one so that they can sell you England later, which I'm not happy with conceptually. But that is all I have time for today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, Solemn, W Haste, Sebastian Haller, Chandok 2.0, Nick Haas, Dark Fortuna, Big Sad, Lev Josh, Gay Fug, Colknors, Golden Arrows, and Hatan, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, Graham Flavian, Kono, Andres Albug, and Deki. Oh, and quick postscript in terms of the actual reviews, I think they might do a 4th Age as a final DLC review because the Modern Age frankly ends way too early in my opinion. I don't think that it should end as early as it does, and that's kind of another critique because I think if they do end it early, this is going to be the first Civ game where we don't have future tech in the future eras. Normally in Civ games, even going as far back as Civ 3 and earlier, we have modern technology that hasn't invented in the real world yet. But the modern era in Civ 7 ends before the current technological age happens, so I think they're kind of setting up for a 4th final age. And yeah, I'm going to put this in the critique section. Forgot to do that in the video though, so oops, here it is, here's the intermission.